Rabbeinu Meli, how are you?
Doing good.
Are you a good faster or a bad faster?
Generally good.
Oh, that's good. When I was a teenager, I was a terrible faster. As I got older, I became a little bit better. We didn't go to Washington. Okay, it was a big mess up. It was supposed to be rain, and there wasn't rain, so we canceled our trip because of the alleged rain, and the rain never came. So it's, as they say in the real world, whatever. It worked out, whatever. Okay, if it's okay with you, let's talk about 17th of Tammuz. Yeah, is that okay?
Okay.
Okay, let's talk about that's what we'll do today. And Mr. Sunday, we'll go back to the Maimer. Okay, first of all, there are 4 fasts in a sequence. 4 fasts. 1, 2, 3, 4, one after the next. The first of those 4 fasts is Asar B'Tevis. Asar B'Tevis we fast because that's when Yerushalayim was laid under siege. They put a siege on the city. They took them, 2.5 years, took them a long time to break the walls of the city. And Asar B'Tevis we fast because the siege was laid on Jerusalem. Now, by the second Beis HaMikdash there was also a siege, but for reasons that I do not know, we do not fast on the date that the siege was started in the second Beis HaMikdash. We fast on the date that the siege was started in the first Beis HaMikdash. That's just the way it works out. Maybe we don't know the exact date when the siege of the second Beis HaMikdash took place. Now the Gemara says in the Sugya of Tisha B'Av, which is in Masechta Gittin, that the siege of Jerusalem by the second Beis HaMikdash could have lasted 22 years. In other words, there was enough food, water, and fuel in Yerushalayim, the walled city of Jerusalem, to supply all the inhabitants with their necessities for 22 years. They could have held off the siege for 22 years. But because of politics, internal politics, the stores were destroyed. The stores were destroyed because there was a large group of people in Yerushalayim who felt that they should go and fight the Romans. So they destroyed the stores, they took away people's choice. The Jews went to fight the Romans and they were wiped out, they were killed. Okay, so again, there was a siege by the first Beis HaMikdash, there was a siege by the second Beis HaMikdash, and we fast even today on the day, it's called Tzom HaChamishi, the fast of the 5th month. We fast even today, Asar B'Tevis, which was the day the siege was laid when the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. The second fast is 17th of Tammuz, and here it's the other way around. A lot of people do not know this. The Navi says that the walls, it's called Hufka Aha'ir, the walls of the city of Jerusalem were breached. So the first Beis HaMikdash, according to the Tanakh, that happened on Tes Tammuz. On the 9th day of the month of Tammuz, the walls of the city of Jerusalem were breached. By the second Beis HaMikdash, that happened on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, on the 17th day of Tammuz. There's a note from the Rebbe where the Rebbe suggests that perhaps by the first Beis HaMikdash was also Shiva Asar B'Tammuz. But Bepashtus, the first Beis HaMikdash walls were breached on the 9th of Tammuz. The second Beis HaMikdash, the walls were breached on the 17th of Tammuz, and that's when we fast. So I'm just pointing out a contrast, that when it comes to the siege, we continue fasting based on the cheshbon of the first Beis HaMikdash. When it comes to the breaching of the walls of Jerusalem, we fast based on the second Beis HaMikdash. Now, Tisha B'Av, for sure, both Batei Mikdash were destroyed on the same day. On Tisha B'Av, the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed as well. The second Beis HaMikdash, the Chazal say, I think it's even a Mishnah, that 5 tragedies occurred on Tisha B'Av. The first, of course, is that the Jewish people, Meraglim came back on Tisha B'Av, Erev Tisha B'Av. And the Jewish people cried the night of Tisha B'Av that they're going to have to go into Eretz Yisrael and it's going to be terrible. So Rashi says in Chumash, that the Eibishter said, Atem bechisem bechiyah shalchinam you cried for no reason, I'm going to give you a bechir l'doros. I'm going to give you something to cry about forever. So Tisha B'Av is the date that the Meraglim returned. The Jewish people cried that they would have to go into Eretz Yisrael. They thought it was a terrible thing. And the end of it, of course, was that Tisha B'Av is a Yom Muchan L'Puranos. Tisha B'Av is a day which has been historically connected to all kinds of tzaddis. And again, most notably, the first Beis HaMikdash and the second Beis HaMikdash were both destroyed on Tisha B'Av. You probably know that World War I started on Tisha B'Av. The expulsion of the Jewish people from Spain took place on Tisha B'Av. And there's a long history of tragic events that seems to land on this date. In other words, the day draws to itself ill events, just like, Pesach is a day that draws to itself happy events. Tisha B'Av seems to draw to itself negative events. Now, but then there's a fourth fast. And the fourth fast is the most obscure, the most hard to understand. And that's Tzom Gedalia. We fast when Gedalia was murdered. Now, why are we fasting when Gedalia was murdered? I mean, Gedalia was not the only Navi killed, historically. Zechariah was murdered. Yeshaya Navi. The great prophet Yeshaya was murdered. We don't have fast days for their deaths. So why do we have a fast day for the death of Gedalia ben Achikam? So you can look in the Sefer Yirmiyah, Jeremiah, where you have the story at length. The Kitzur HaMaisa was that Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babel, was an evil man. But he was very superstitious, and he had a lot of respect for the Jewish people. And when he destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, he left a Yishuv, he left Jewish people living in Israel under his vassal, under his general. And Jews could have continued living in Eretz Yisrael after the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. There was a faction of the Jewish camp who felt that any kind of honor showed to Nebuchadnezzar was not acceptable. Since Nebuchadnezzar had destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, you got to hate him, you have to do everything to oppose him, and so on. And they made an alliance with Mitzrayim, with Egypt. Now, Babylon was much stronger than Egypt, but Egypt was independent. The Egyptian kings had some independence from Bavel, and they decided to align themselves with Mitzrayim. And the Navi said, the prophet said, Gedalia said, oh, don't do this. God said, submit to Bavel. Hashem said, subdue yourself to Bavel. Do not fight with Bavel. Bavel is the preeminent power. Bavel is the predominant power. We, the Jewish people, are in a bad light in the relationship with Hashem. If we want to survive, we have to bend our heads. In other words, there were times in history when the Gedali Yisrael said that the will of Hashem was that Jews should be pacifists, non-aggressors, because Hashem wasn't happy with us. This happened when the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed by Yirmiyah, Jeremiah, and it happened by the second Beis HaMikdash through the Tana Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And in both cases, there was opposition. There were people who said, no, let's go fight. Let's fight the Romans. Let's fight the Babylonians. And that's what happened. The death of Gedalia, the murder of Gedalia ben Achikam, has to do with the fact there was a faction of Jews who disagreed with the prophet. The prophet of God was saying, Hashem is angry with us. He's not smiling at us. He doesn't like us today. And therefore, what you do when the Eibush is not happy with the Jewish people is you submit. You be pacifist. You don't fight. You don't be aggressive. And they said they wanted to join with Mitzrayim and let Mitzrayim defeat Bavel. So the only way to get this done was to kill Gedalia. Gedalia was the representative of the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael. Gedalia was loyal to Nebuchadnezzar. Gedalia was loyal to the Navi Yirmiyah, that you couldn't fight, antagonize the Babylonians. So they killed Gedalia. And when they killed Gedalia, the Babylonians, the people of Bavel who Gedalia worked for, took revenge. Whatever was left of the Yishuv in Israel had to run into Egypt. In other words, those Jews who were involved in the coup d'etat and the assassination of Gedalia ben Achikam ran into Mitzrayim. And to make a long story short, Israel was evacuated from Jews. There were no Yidden left at all. They all left. So it says in the holy books that when the Jewish people left Eretz Yisrael, the Ruach HaKodesh left with them. The divine spirit left with them. In other words, the power for Nevuah went higher. When the Jewish people would come back, Shivas Tzion, when they would come back to build the second Beis Hamikdash, that Ruach HaKodesh would never come back. So we fast on the day that Gedaliah was murdered, because technically it was the end of the Yishuv, it was the end of the inhabiting Israel for close to 1,000 years from the times of Yeshua ben Nun, that was uninterrupted by Jewish people. And spiritually, because Ruach HaKodesh, a divine spirit, left, and it never came back when the Jewish people returned to the second Beis Hamikdash. And there's also a Maimeh Chazal about the second Beis Hamikdash, V'toichal, V'titzba, V'toisar. It's a pasuk in the book of Rus. It says the Chazal Ad Yemei Rebbe. The second Beis Hamikdash was destroyed during the time of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the teachers of Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Yeshua, who were the teachers of Rabbi Akiva, who was the teacher of Rabbi Meir, who was the teacher of Rabbeinu HaKadosh. So there's like 4 generations between Churban Bayesheni and Rebbe, the one who wrote the Mishnah. So the Chazal say that some of the spirit of the second Beis Hamikdash, which was of course much lower than the first Beis Hamikdash, would remain until the times the Mishnah was sealed, and then that Ruach HaKodesh departed as well. And that's why we have a 4th fast, okay? So we have a fast for the siege, we have a fast for breaching the walls, and they're different. The fast for the siege, we still fast like it was by the first Beis Hamikdash. The fast for breaking the walls, we fast like it was by the second Beis Hamikdash. Then we have the fast for the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, which was, both of them occurred on Tisha B'Av. And then we have a fast when the Yishuv, when the community of Jews were forced to leave Israel altogether. The Ruach HaKodesh left, and that Ruach HaKodesh has never come back. That is a brief history of the 4 fasts. Now I want to say one more thing, and then I'm going to let you ask me questions. Okay, one more detail. One of the things that occurred after the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash, and it didn't happen right away, it happened a couple of 100 years after, was what's called Bittul of Smicha. There used to be something called Smicha. Smicha, in those days, was it was much stronger than Smicha is today. It was called Musmach Ish Mi Pi Ish Ad Moshe Rabbeinu, that you have a Smicha that's uninterrupted going back to Moshe Rabbeinu, and that Smicha gave you a lot of authority. That Smicha allowed you to be Makadosh Chedesh Al Pi Ha'Re'iyah. You could look up at the moon, decide when the month is, and make a Chedesh without a calendar. You could also decide when to make a leap year based on Cheshbonis. That Smicha allowed you to be done Din in Nefashis, capital punishment, Malchus, Knossos. There are many things that only those Musmachim were able to do, that when that Smicha was abolished, that stopped. Now, when did that Smicha stop, and why did that Smicha stop? So this is, the Mendel Kasha has a whole arichas on it. The Rebbe spoke about it once. Tafshin Mem Hey, the Rebbe spoke about this ba'arichas. I once learned the Smicha. I think I understood it. But the Nekuda is that the Smicha only works in Israel. This Smicha, which is an unbreakable, broken chain till Moshe Rabbeinu, that authorized those who have this Smicha to even calculate the Rosh Chodesh and the New Year without following the calendar was fixed thousands of years ago, as well as Dine Knossos and Onshim. You can give fines, and you can actually give people punishment, including capital punishment. It seems that this smicha went away when Jews left Israel. After the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash, so Jews continued living in Israel for a while. I mean, the Mechaber of the Mishnah, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, lived in northern Eretz Yisrael. But at a certain point, I think they were called the Aryan Christians, the early Christians, threw every Jew out of Israel, and there were no more Yidden. The smicha has to be in Eretz Yisrael. So again, it's a little bit unsure what caused what. But it seems like there was an understanding that now that Yidden are leaving Eretz Yisrael, you cannot give this smicha outside of Eretz Yisrael, or whatever the particulars are. It was allowed to dissipate. In other words, they stopped using it. They stopped giving this smicha even when they were technically able to give this smicha. And then once there was nobody else alive who had this smicha, to renew the smicha, to bring it back after it stops, is incredibly difficult. Because in order to renew the smicha, to bring this smicha back after it stops, so you need very, very special conditions. Number one, you need to be in Israel. And number two, you need to have the majority, more than half of the Rabbanim in the world concentrated in one place in Israel, And only then can you renew the smicha. More than half the rabbanim of the world have to be in one place. Now, there was a time, about 450 years ago, where in the city of Tzfas, there was such a collection of rabbanim, and they wanted to actually bring the smicha back, and they gave smicha to 3 people. The Beis Yosef was given smicha, the Moshe Alshich was given the same ancient smicha, and Reb Chaim Vital was given this smicha. But they did it in Tzfas. In Yerushalayim, there was one gadol, his name was Rabbi Levi ben Chaviv, that al-Bach, and he argued that according to halacha, it's not enough Israel, it has to be Jerusalem. Ki mitzion teitzei seira udvar Hashem Yerushalayim. And he opposed that effort, and he shut it down. They gave smicha to 3 people, but then they discontinued it. So, to use a parallel, this is now me just using my own imagination. Just like by the first Beis HaMikdash, at one point the Yidden left. After the Churban, Yidden left. And the Ruach HaKodesh left, and the Nevuah ended. That's why you fast Tzom Gedalia. You could make a case that there was a similar idea after the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash. The Jewish people eventually were forced to leave Israel, and when they left Israel, something significant stopped in our history that's not going to be resumed until Mashiach comes, which is Inyan HaSmicha. This is why we have the 4 fasts, okay? Now, you can ask me questions. You good?
Yeah, I'm good.
You followed what I said?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me move on to another point. One more thing, and then we'll call it a class, okay? Why do we fast? Why do we fast on these days? So some people would say that we fast on these days because of suffering. Our ancestors suffered, so we want to experience a little bit of the suffering that they experienced way back then. So we fast so that we should also experience a little bit of suffering. But the Rambam absolutely dispels this notion. The Rambam said that's absolutely wrong. We do not fast to suffer along with our ancestors. I suppose I don't think that's even a Jewish idea. You don't help a person who's suffering by bringing artificially onto yourself a similar suffering. The Rambam paskins that we fast as an act of tshuva, as a fast for tshuva. And the logic of it is very, very simple. The fact of life is that when a person is hungry and tired and needs water, especially in the summertime, he's weak. And when you're weak, you feel vulnerable. And when you feel vulnerable, you're more open to be honest about one's faults, one's chesreinis, one's deficiencies, one's problems. So the Rambam says we fast because fast brings hachna'ah, that's the word he uses. Hachna'ah means a submissiveness, a bittul. And this submissiveness opens up the likelihood of us doing tshuva on a fast day. So the Rambam says all fast days are days of tshuva. Moreover, our Rebbe pointed out some 32 years ago that there used to be a tradition that on fast days people would gather in shul mincha time, and the way I imagine it is, except for Tisha B'Av, people went to work. You're allowed to work on a fast day. People went to work. Say Medalia, people went to work. Tainus Esther, people went to work. Asara B'Tevis, people went to work. Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, and they worked till noon, half day. Then they came to shul for mincha. And after mincha, one of the most prominent people in the community would get up on the bima, and he would speak divrei yesodros. He would speak about tshuva and about coming closer to Hashem. And again, all in the spirit of the brokenheartedness, which is predicated on the fact that people were not eating. So fast days were days of tshuva. So the Rebbe, our Rebbe, said he doesn't know why this minhag was discontinued. If there was a minhag in the ancient world, hundreds of years ago, that on a fast day after mincha, one of the senior members of the community or the rabbi or somebody important would get up and speak divrei kvushim, speak words of Yesodus for tshuva, we should do it also. And the Rebbe renewed that custom. The Rebbe developed a custom. Every single fast day after mincha, the Rebbe would speak what he called divrei kvushim, words of arousal for tshuva, etc. Okay? So that's how we understand that a fast day is Yesodus for tshuva. And in the Navi it says that it's Yom Ratzon. It says in Tanakh that the fast days, which are days of tshuva, are also Yemei HaRatzon. That means they're desirable days, they're good days, they're important days. Or to say it slightly differently, they're days connected to something special. What special thing is associated with these fast days that we're able to do tshuva? Which explains the final point of this little shir that we're having this morning, which is that it says in Tanakh, and it's brought in Rambam, that when Mashiach comes, the fast days are going to become Yomim Tovim. After Mashiach comes, Yehafchu Yomim Elo L'Sasanu L'Simcha V'Ha'emes V'Ha'Shalom Ahevu. When Mashiach comes, all fast days become Yomim Tovim, happy days. So of course the question is obvious: if a person fasted because a tragedy occurred, and then the tragedy is lifted, right? The Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. When the Beis HaMikdash is rebuilt, you don't cry about the destruction of the previous Beis HaMikdash because you have a new one. So fine, you had a fast day. The reason for the fast day was reversed. Now things are better. You have a Beis HaMikdash, you're living in Eretz Yisrael, you're able to study Torah, etc., 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 etc. So why become a Yom Tov? Just abolish the fast and forget about it. Why does a fast get turned around into a Yom Tov? And this is the answer: because since the fast days were not just days of suffering, the fast days were days of tshuva, so we see the fast themselves as a very positive thing. We see the negative days as being the beginning of the tshuva, the beginning of the coming of Mashiach. And therefore when Mashiach comes, you don't just stop fasting, but you reverse the fast, you turn the fasts around, and the fast become Yemei Ratzon V'Simcha. And I guess the best way for me to illustrate this is to make the following point. It says in Medrash, it's brought in Sichas of the Rebbe a lot. It says in Medrash that in the Beis HaMikdash there were kruvim, there were cherubs. There was the likeness of a young boy and a young girl with wings who faced each other. Whenever Hashem was happy with the Jewish people, those kruvim would face each other. When Hashem was displeased with the Jewish people, those kruvim would miraculously turn their backs to one another. In the latter years of the second Beis HaMikdash, the kruvim were permanently back to back. In the last years of the second Beis HaMikdash, the kruvim were permanently back to back. At the moment of the Churban, when the Beis HaMikdash was actually burning, being destroyed, the Rosh Titus went into the Beis HaMikdash and he pulled out the kruvim and he showed the Jewish people who were there in Yerushalayim that not only were the kruvim facing each other, the kruvim were hugging each other. They were in embrace. And Titus said to the Jews, look, your God is making fun of you. He's laughing at you. When he's happy with you, he faces you. When he's not happy with you, he turns his back to you. When he's destroying his house, he's hugging you. It's a medrash. At the moment of the Churban, the kruvim were me'urin zeh b'zeh. They were in an embrace, like the Seir. So the Rebbe explains what this means. That the moment of maximum love between Hashem and the Jewish people is the moment of the Churban. When Hashem slaps us, and he slaps us in the face, unfortunately, that's an expression of maximum love. Now, when you're experiencing that slap, it doesn't feel that way. It feels terrible. But the reason the moment of the slap is maximum love is obvious. Because when the Eibishter slaps us, he wakes us up. And he turns us around, and he brings us closer to himself. Or to say it slightly differently, when the Eibishter destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, he destroyed his house. He didn't destroy his nation. He gave us an opportunity to be able to do tshuva. That's why when Mashiach comes, the biggest holidays of the year are going to be Tzem Gedalia, and Asara B'Teves, and 17th of Tammuz, and Tisha B'Av. I have this fantasy in my mind that, just like you have Sukkot, you have the first days of Sukkot, then you have Chol Hamoed, and then you have the last days of Sukkot. Well, Mashiach is going to come, you're going to have the first Yom Tov is going to be 17th Tammuz. The last Yom Tov is going to be Tisha B'Av, and the whole 3 weeks is going to be one big party. In my fantasy, there's going to be a huge celebration on 17th Tammuz. There's going to be a big Yom Tov, an even larger celebration on Tisha B'Av, and the whole 3 weeks in between, we're going to be going on trips, or whatever it is, dancing Simchas Beis HaSheva. The whole 3 weeks in the middle is going to be one long period of Yom Tov. That's just a mishagas of mine. But the point is, when Mashiach comes, the fast days become Yomim Tovim, because the fast days are one of the real reasons we still exist. In other words, sometimes we have a setback. But we have a setback because it brings us closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's when Mashiach comes, the fast days are turned into Yom Tov. Now, one more little detail, then I'll either stop or let you ask me questions. And that is that it says in Chazal that when Mashiach comes, all the Yom Tovim are bottled. Pesach is bottled, Shavuos is bottled, Sukkot is bottled. Okay? The Chiddush is that Chanukah Purim are still going to be there. Now, of course, the Rebbe in his writings and his teachings says that the idea that when Mashiach comes, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot are going to be bottled doesn't mean we're not going to eat matzah on Pesach and we're not going to sit in the sukkah on Sukkot. It means that the holiness of those days is going to be bottled in the holiness of the regular days. Mashiach's regular days are going to be holier than the special days of Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, so you're just not going to see how Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot are special. So it comes out that we have three kinds of Yom Tovim. The first category of Yom Tovim is Yom Tovim that we have now. Though Mashiach comes, we stop keeping them. The second category of Yom Tovim is Yom Tovim we have now that we're going to continue after Mashiach comes. The third category of Yom Tovim is brand new Yom Tovim that are first going to begin after Mashiach. What are going to be the holidays after Mashiach? Sem Gedalia, Asar B'Tevis, 17th of Tammuz, and Tisha B'Av. So they're going to be big celebrations. And as they say in the real world, let it be now. We want Mashiach now. Okay, I talked fast and I said a lot. What's on your mind?
I'm not sure how you're getting that we're going to be pardoned for 3 weeks.
It's a fantasy of mine. It doesn't say in any sefer. I just have this idea that just like you have a week of Sukkot now, Chalamoid, so when Mashiach comes, you're going to have Shivas and Tammuz is going to be the equivalent of the first day of Sukkot. Tisha B'Av is going to be like the Simchas Torah of Sukkot. And 3 weeks, we'll do 1 week Simchas Beis HaSheva, 1 week trip, Sechveisvas, and 1 week Koil. Whatever it'll be good. The Nikkers it should be now. Right? The Rebbe wants us to think of Mashiach as real, as today, as now, as us. As Elam Haza Agashmi V'Achumri. Okay? Okay, Meli, I'll let you go. An easy fast. Don't work too hard. And I'll see you on Sunday, Mitzvah Hashem.
To have an easy fast.
Thank you.